A zero coupon bond is actually a contract to provide a specified lump sum at some specified future date, also known as the maturity date. For the investor, there is a negative cash flow at the point of investment and a single positive cash flow on the specified future date. Just to give you a bit of background information here, it is essentially a contract because two parties get into the agreement. Just to give an example, for example, a government can issue bonds in order to raise money, probably for infrastructural development or for some other reason. And let's go with an example where a government needs to raise £500, and they decide to raise this through bonds in the stock exchange, where they decide to take on, say, 10 contracts, where each contract means the person has to pay £50, such that 10 contracts and it is £50. You multiply that, the government gets a total of 500. And the thing is, these 10 people who are getting into the contract with the government and paying £50 each are not doing it for free. So the question is, how do these people gain? These people gain because they buy each contract for £50 and give the government £50, in effect helping the government raise this much amount of money. When the contract comes to an end, that is at this point, at the maturity date, when it comes to an end, the government pays them back slightly more than £50. Let's say if they bought the contract for £50, the government could give them something slightly higher, with a bit of interest on it. So what we have here is the investor has a negative cash outflow at the point of investment, right here, and then a single positive cash flow on the specified future date. This specified future date is actually a date when it's also called the maturity date, and it's in effect a date when the investment comes to an end, when the government practically says promises to pay back the money they borrowed at this point. Alright, our next problem, which is slightly similar to the zero coupon bond, is called the fixed interest security. Well, an example of a fixed interest security is a coupon bearing bond. The characteristic feature of such a security in its simplest form is that the holder of a bond will receive a lump sum of specified amount at some specified future time, together with a series of regular level interest payments until the repayment of the lump sum. So here, in this case, the investor has an initial negative cash flow, like same as the previous case as the zero coupon bond. The investor has an initial negative cash flow, and then he gets a single non-positive cash flow on a specified future date, and a series of smaller non-positive cash flows on a regular set of specified future dates. This can be compared to the zero coupon bond in that there's a negative cash flow here, and then the investor gets back the investment, but we would have had the regular interest payments. The difference between these two is that while the fixed interest security offers the regular interest payments throughout the investment period, the zero coupon bond does not offer regular interest payment through the investment period. The next one you're going to look at is the index-linked security. Well, with a conventional fixed interest security like this, the interest payments are all of the same amount. This is the same as this, is the same as this, is the same as this. Well, if inflationary pressures in the economy are not kept under control, the purchasing power of a given sum of money diminishes with the passage of time, significantly so when the rate of inflation is high. For this reason, some investors are attracted to a security for which the actual cash amount of interest payments and of the final capital repayment are linked to an index which reflects the effects of inflation. Alright, in this case, we have an initial negative cash flow. Initial negative cash flow followed by a series of unknown positive cash flows. We do not know what the value of these cash flows are because the value of these positive cash flows here are linked to an index. It's an index-linked security. The value of these payments here depend on how well the index performs. And then the investor gets a single larger unknown positive cash flow all on specified dates. You have these payments throughout the period, but we don't know what these how much these payments are because they depend on the value of the index. And we also do not know how much this payment at the end of the period is going to be because it also depends on the performance of the index. But what we can say is that the amount of these future cash flows that are related to the inflation index are known in real terms. They are known in real terms because we know the amount that will be paid is related to the performance of the index. Alright, our next security is actually cash on deposit, which is which I feel is it's much easier to understand. It simply has to do with the fact that cash is placed on deposit, and so at the outset, the investor time zero, the investor has a negative cash flow because he places cash on deposit, and he can choose when to take back his cash. He can choose when to take his cash away from deposit and in effect ending his investment. An interesting thing about cash on deposit is that interest additions will be subject to regular change as determined by the investment provider. So if we do not know what this guy puts his cash in a deposit, and he could earn interest while his cash is in deposit, but we do not know what these amounts of interest are going to be. We do not even know when the interest is going to be added, because these interest additions are subject to regular change as determined by investment provider. So the key feature of the cash on deposit is that the investor has an initial negative cash flow, and he gets interest payments throughout his throughout the amount of time that he has his cash on deposit, but he is not aware of the amount of interest he gets, and is not aware of the times when the interest comes in, because that is determined by the investment provider. At times, these additions may only be known on a day-to-day basis. So, as a result, the amounts and timing of cash flows will therefore be unknown. The next security you're going to look at is equities. Equities, otherwise known as equity shares, are actually held by the owners of an organization. So the equity shareholders own the company that issues the shares. For example, if a company issues, let's say, 4,000 shares, a company issues 4,000 shares, and an investor buys 1,000 shares. In effect, this investor owns a quarter of company. He owns 25% of the company through the shares that he has invested in. Now, the thing with shares is that shares do not earn a fixed rate of interest as fixed interest securities do. Instead, shareholders are entitled to shares in the company's profit in proportion to the number of shares owned. So let's say the company makes £1 million profit. This investor here, who owns 25% of the company, is entitled to 25% of this. So you get your returns according to the amount of shares that you hold. At times, and the distribution of the profits to shareholders takes the form of regular payments or dividends. So what we have here is that initially we have the investor has a negative cash outflow, and he is entitled to dividends. Dividends are actually calculated from the profit that the company makes, and they are given to the investors according to the proportion of the shares of the company that they own. The one thing we have to realize is that with dividends, the returns are not constant. It's not fixed. There's no rule that says a company has to pay dividends every single year or at certain periods. They're actually determined by the company management depending on how well the company is doing. So